At the heart of the prosperity gospel word of faith movement is what is called the little God's doctrine. All of the faith preachers teach that if you are a Christian, you are in fact a little God. Watch this quote-unquote exposition of Genesis 1, 26 and 27 from Creflo Dollar. Undoubtedly the most aptly named of the prosperity preachers. But watch this. Watch this from Creflo Dollar.
Now, in verse 26 and verse 27, God now submits himself to this principle of everything producing after its own kind. And in verse 26 and 27, let's read it out loud. Ready? Read. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now that's interesting, because if everything produces after its own kind, we now see God producing man. And if God now produces man, and everything produces after its own kind, if horses get together, they produce what? And if dogs get together, they produce what? If cats get together, they produce what? But if the Godhead gets together and say, let us make man, then what are they producing? They're producing gods. Now I got to hit this thing real hard in the very beginning, because I ain't got time to go through all this. But I'm going to say to you right now, you are gods, little g. You are gods because you came from God, and you are gods. You're not just human. The only human part about you is this physical body that you live in. The real me is just like God.
The real me is just like God. Blasphemy. Blasphemy. Dear friends, when the Bible says that God created man in his image, that means that as human beings, you and I are the pinnacle of God's creation. We are the pinnacle of his creation. And we have the potential and the capacity through a saving relationship with Jesus Christ to know God. None of the other created order has that privilege and ability. You know, I love dogs. I do. I like dogs. I really do. I grew up with black labs, love dogs. But the greatest, smartest dog in the world will never know God, because he's not created in God's image. Cats for sure aren't. But just kidding. But just kidding, cat lovers, sort of. But we are. And I don't care what PETA says, you and I are of infinite more value than a chicken or an aardvark or platypus. We are the pinnacle of God's creation. But the Bible is very clear. There is only one God. And he is a jealous God who will not share his glory with another. He is a jealous God. And if I remember my Bible correctly, wasn't the desire to be just like God kind of what led to the whole fall thing in the first place? How ironic. The very thing, the very first temptation that led to the very first sin, led to this whole fallen, depraved state, in the first place, is at the core of the Word of Faith movement. They teach it as truth, and they want you to believe it. How ironic. How dreadfully ironic. Who else in the Bible wanted to be just like God? Satan. He wanted the worship that God was getting. And he rose up in rebellion against God. And it got him and a third of the angels along with him kicked out of heaven. The little God's doctrine is quite literally a doctrine of demons. And the prosperity preachers teach it as truth. I want us briefly to look at what the faith preachers teach about the doctrine of the fall. We're going to breeze through these real quickly. Number one, the faith preachers teach that Adam was an exact duplicate of God. Not a little like God, not a lot like God. He was God. That God literally reproduced himself in Adam. Adam was a carbon copy of Yahweh. Well, we all know what happened, right? Adam sinned. Which, of course, brings up a very interesting question. If Adam was Yahweh and he sinned, was it Yahweh who sinned? Carry these doctrines out to their logical conclusions. See how heretical they really are. But when Adam sinned, he lost his supposed deity, transferred it to Satan. When this happened, the real Yahweh God lost his legal right to planet Earth and was kicked out. And so according to classic word faith theology, even as we sit here this afternoon, the real Yahweh God is up there somewhere, but he's got no access to planet Earth. He's been kicked out. Well, somebody has to fill that void, right? So Satan is all too eager to step up to the plate, and Satan becomes the legal God of planet Earth. Dear ones, Satan is not the legal God of planet Earth. God is the legal God of planet Earth. The earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. Satan is referred to as the god of this age. 2 Corinthians 4:4, some translations say God of this world. That word in the Greek, aeon, more accurately rendered as age. It's not referring to this dirt and rock and water sphere on which you and I are now sitting. It's not talking about that. Paul is making a theological point, not a legal point. God is the legal God of planet Earth. Well, guess what happens when a person gets saved? Guess what he gets back? He gets his godhood back. He regains his deity. He becomes God again, just like Adam was before he fell. And this is why the prosperity preachers hold so tenaciously to prosperity, to health and wealth, because we're God's. And a God cannot be poor, and a God certainly cannot be sick. A lot of people think that this stuff that you see on Christian television, and by the way, it's not just Christian television. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of churches all around the world that teach this stuff. It's not just health and wealth. Those are just offshoots of a much more serious core theological problem with the movement. It's a different gospel. But this is why they hold so tenaciously to health and wealth. We're God's. What other theological cult, by the way, does that kind of remind you of? Mormonism. A lot of interesting overlaps between Word of Faith, Mormonism, Roman Catholicism, and even, believe it or not, Islam, and even Hinduism. Same basic heresies, they're just packaged differently for different audiences.